What happens when feelings cross boundaries? It was an ordinary morning, like so many before it. The sun barely peeked over the horizon, and the town was slowly waking up. He was sitting at his usual spot in the small, cozy cafe, sipping his coffee. He came here every morning before heading to work. His routine predictable, his life simple. The cafe was quiet, and the only sounds were the soft hum of the espresso machine and the clinking of mugs on the counter. She had been working there for a while now, behind the counter with a warm smile for the regulars. She'd always been friendly, but today something felt different. He noticed it immediately. The way she laughed a little longer at his jokes, how she lingered by his table just a moment too long. At first, he thought it was nothing, just the usual small talk, the kind they'd shared countless times before. But there was a shift, a subtle one, almost imperceptible, but enough for him to feel it. He was used to their light-hearted conversations, the kind that started with the weather and ended with the same generic pleasantries. She was always polite, and he had always appreciated that. But lately, something in the air felt heavier, a tension he couldn't quite place. She would often smile at him as she passed by, and today, for the first time, it felt different. It wasn't just a friendly gesture. It felt like something more, though he couldn't quite figure out what that was. His thoughts were interrupted as she approached his table again, coffee pot in hand. Her fingers brushed against his as she refilled his cup. It was just a touch, but it left a mark on him. He could feel it, long after she walked away. He didn't understand why. He'd had countless interactions like this before, but now everything felt new, almost as if he was seeing her for the first time. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. It wasn't like him to overthink things. He had been through a lot in the past few years, and relationships weren't exactly his priority. Still, there was something about the way she looked at him, something that made him wonder if there was more to their connection than he had realized. For the next few days, he found himself thinking about her more than usual. Her smile, her laugh, even the way she moved around the cafe, everything about her seemed to catch his attention. He wasn't the type to get swept up in feelings easily, but there was something undeniably magnetic about her. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing, something he couldn't quite put into words. He tried to push those thoughts aside. He was just a regular customer. She was just the barista. There was no need to make things more complicated than they already were. But the more he tried to ignore it, the more it lingered. Every time she walked by, every time their eyes met, it felt like the world slowed down for just a second. It was an odd feeling, and he couldn't help but wonder if she felt it too. But how could he know for sure? He had never been one to take risks, especially not when it came to emotions. He had learned the hard way to keep his feelings in check, to avoid situations that could get complicated. But as he sat there, watching her work, he realized he didn't want to let this moment pass by without knowing what it meant. It was clear that something was different, but he couldn't tell if it was just his imagination or if she was feeling the same pull. He was conflicted, unsure whether he should act on the growing tension between them or keep his distance. He didn't want to make things awkward, especially not in such a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. As the days went by, the connection between them only seemed to grow stronger. Their interactions became a little more personal, a little more meaningful. She started sharing small details about her life, things she hadn't talked about before. It was subtle, but it felt like a bridge was being built between them, one conversation at a time. Still, he held back. He wasn't ready to cross the line. Not yet. He wasn't sure where this was headed, but he knew he couldn't rush it. It was clear that something was happening, something neither of them had expected, but he wasn't sure if it was something worth exploring, or something that would just complicate things further. He had never been good at reading signals, especially when it came to emotions. He had spent so much of his life focused on work and responsibilities that he had forgotten what it was like to just be in the moment, to let things unfold naturally. But with her, it was different. Every time he saw her, he felt like he was falling behind in a race he didn't even know he was running. She had a way of making him feel like he was missing something, like he should be paying attention to the feelings he had buried deep inside. And so he sat there, waiting, watching, wondering if the connection they shared was enough to break through the walls he had built around his heart. The next few days were filled with an almost unbearable tension. Every time he walked into the cafe, he felt the weight of it hanging in the air. She was still as friendly as ever, but there was a new edge to their interactions. She seemed to notice him more, her eyes lingering on him just a little longer than usual. Every smile, every laugh, felt like it had more meaning behind it, and it left him questioning everything. It wasn't that he hadn't noticed her before. He had, but now everything about her seemed to stand out in sharp detail. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she smiled when he made a joke, even the way she shifted her weight as she moved around the cafe. It all felt like it had deeper meaning now. He couldn't stop thinking about her, couldn't stop wondering what it all meant. He tried to keep things casual, to stick to their usual routine. But one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, something changed. She came over to his table, her eyes a little softer than usual. There was a hesitation in her steps, as if she was unsure of something. She filled his cup without saying much, but when she turned to leave, she paused for a moment, looking at him over her shoulder. There was something in her gaze that made his heart skip a beat. It was a look that said everything without saying a word. He tried to shake it off. He didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But deep down, he couldn't ignore the pull between them. It was real, undeniable. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what to do about it. As the days passed, he started to notice that their conversations were becoming more personal. She started sharing more about her life outside of work, small details, like what she did on her days off or where she grew up. And each time she shared something new, it felt like another layer of their connection was being peeled back. She was opening up, letting him in, and he couldn't help but feel a little more drawn to her with every passing day. But he was still hesitant. There was so much uncertainty in the air, so much potential for things to go wrong. He didn't want to complicate his life, didn't want to risk something that could turn awkward, or worse, end badly. He had enough experience to know how fragile relationships could be, how easily they could fall apart when feelings got involved. And yet, despite all his reservations, he couldn't help but feel the spark between them. It was undeniable, and it was growing stronger with every passing moment. One evening, as she brought his usual cup of coffee to the table, their fingers brushed against each other. It was a brief touch, almost imperceptible, but it sent a shock through his body. He looked up at her, and for a moment, their eyes locked. There was no turning back now. He knew, deep down, that something was changing. Something was shifting between them, and he had to decide whether he was ready to embrace it or let it slip away. He found himself unable to move, unable to speak. The moment felt suspended in time, and for a brief second, everything else in the cafe faded away. It was just the two of them, standing on the precipice of something neither of them fully understood. He could see the hesitation in her eyes, too, the uncertainty about what to do next. And just like that, the tension between them reached its peak. The thought of what could happen next hung in the air like a heavy cloud. He knew that this moment could change everything, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for that kind of change. But as he watched her walk away, his heart sank. He realized that if he didn't act soon, this connection might fade away, just like so many others before it. And so, he made a decision. He couldn't let it go. He couldn't let her slip away without at least knowing what was possible between them. He had to take a chance, no matter how uncertain it was. Because sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all. The days after that brief electric touch felt heavier. There was something in the air now that hadn't been there before, an unspoken tension that both of them tried to ignore. The cafe was still the same, familiar and comforting, but the space between them now felt different. Every time he came in for his coffee, he couldn't help but notice how she smiled a little more shyly, or how her eyes lingered on him for a second longer than usual. He tried to act normal, to go back to their usual routine, but nothing felt the same. His heart raced every time she walked past, and when their eyes met, it was like a spark shot through him. He wasn't sure if it was just his imagination, but it felt like they were on the edge of something that could either bring them closer or push them apart forever. She seemed to notice the change in him, too. There were moments when she looked at him as if waiting for something, almost as if she expected him to say something, to make a move, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't know what he was afraid of. Maybe it was the fear of ruining their friendship, or the fear of crossing a line that couldn't be undone. One afternoon, as he sat at his usual spot by the window sipping his coffee, she came over to refill his cup. She stood there for a moment, her fingers brushing the rim of his mug. She wasn't looking at him directly, but he could sense her hesitation. He wanted to say something, to break the silence that had settled between them, but the words seemed to get stuck in his throat. For a moment, it felt like they were in a limbo, neither knowing how to move forward. She turned to walk away, but then stopped. She paused, glancing back over her shoulder at him, her eyes soft and uncertain. "You've been quiet today," she said, her voice a little quieter than usual. He smiled, though it didn't feel entirely genuine. "Just thinking." "About what?" she asked, still watching him carefully. He shrugged, trying to act nonchalant, but he could feel the weight of her gaze on him. "Nothing important." But she wasn't fooled. She knew something was different, and he knew she was waiting for him to acknowledge it, to say what they both felt but hadn't yet spoken. He felt his chest tighten. He couldn't lie to her. Not like this. He couldn't pretend anymore that nothing had changed.
"I think we both know things are different now," he finally said, his voice a little rough, betraying the uncertainty he felt. She didn't answer immediately.
Instead, she placed the coffee pot back on the counter and took a deep breath. "I know," she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "It's hard to ignore." Her words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, the space that had always felt so familiar seemed to shrink. There was no turning back now. They had acknowledged the elephant in the room, and now they were left with the question of what to do next. He wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't sure what he was even feeling. Part of him wanted to pull away, to run from whatever this was, but another part of him, an unexpected part of him, wanted to take a step closer, to see where this connection could go. He was like standing at the edge of a cliff, wondering whether to take the leap or turn back. As she walked away, he couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. She hadn't said much, but the brief moment of honesty between them had opened up a floodgate of emotions. He didn't know where this was headed, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't pretend anymore. Not after everything that had happened. The next few days passed in a blur. He couldn't focus at work, couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, that something had already changed. Every time he walked into the cafe, he half expected her to pull back, to avoid him. But she didn't. She was still friendly, still kind, but there was something in the way she spoke to him now. Something softer, more vulnerable. She was no longer hiding behind the mask of casual indifference, and neither was he. But still, they didn't talk about it, not directly. They didn't need to. There was an unspoken understanding between them now. A recognition of what had been left unsaid, but it was starting to feel like it wasn't enough anymore. They couldn't keep pretending that nothing had happened. And so, he decided to act. He couldn't keep living in this space of uncertainty, always wondering what could be. He had to know. He had to find out if what they were feeling was real, or if it was just a passing moment, a spark that would fade once it was exposed to the light. The next time he saw her, he didn't wait for her to approach him. Instead, he stood up and walked over to the counter where she was working. She looked up in surprise, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. There was a weight to the silence, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, full of possibility. He opened his mouth, not quite sure what he was going to say, but the words came out anyway. "We need to talk." She nodded, her expression unreadable. Yeah, I think we do. They stepped outside, away from the bustling cafe, and into the cool evening air. The world around them felt distant, as if nothing existed outside of the moment they were sharing. There were no distractions here. No one else around to judge or to intervene. It was just the two of them, standing on the edge of something uncertain. I don't want to keep pretending, he said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. I can't keep ignoring what's between us. I don't know where this will go, but I don't want to let it slip away without knowing. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand the depth of his words. I feel the same way, she said quietly.
I've been scared too. I don't know what this means, but I don't want to pretend anymore either.
For a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. They had already said everything that needed to be said. There were no more questions, no more doubts. They both knew that whatever happened next, it would change things forever, but they were ready to face it, together. The days that followed felt different. The tension between them had been replaced with a kind of quiet understanding, a mutual recognition of what had happened and what was still to come. They didn't rush into anything, didn't try to force things. Instead, they allowed themselves to explore this new connection, this new reality, without pressure. At first, it felt like walking on a tightrope. There were moments when they both hesitated, unsure of where to place their next step. But with each passing day, the fear that had once dominated their interactions began to fade. They talked more openly, laughed more easily, and shared things about themselves that had once been buried deep. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. They still spent time in the cafe, still shared those quiet moments, but now there was something more between them, something that wasn't just about casual conversation or polite smiles. It was about connection, about opening up in a way neither of them had ever done before. And with each passing day, they grew closer, not in a rush, not with grand gestures, but in the small, quiet moments that made life meaningful. The way their hands brushed as they passed by each other, the way their eyes met across the room, the way they could now share their hopes and fears without hesitation. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of doubt and uncertainty, but they faced them together. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and moments when they questioned what they were doing. But for the first time in a long time, they were willing to face those challenges, side by side. Because sometimes, the biggest risk wasn't the chance you took, but the chance you didn't, and they were ready to take that chance together. The weeks that followed felt like a mixture of calm and excitement. After the conversation they had shared, things between them had changed, but in a way that felt natural. It wasn't the big dramatic shift that he might have expected. Instead, it was quieter, gentler, like two people who had been walking on separate paths for a long time, only to find their roads converging in the most unexpected way. They began to spend more time together, but not in any rushed or forced manner. It was the little things that mattered now. The quiet conversations over coffee, the way their shoulders brushed as they passed in the cafe, the simple glances that held more meaning than words ever could. There was no pressure to define what they were, no rush to put labels on something that was still so new and fragile. They were simply two people exploring the connection they had found, and for the first time in a long while it felt easy. He found himself thinking about her, even when she wasn't around. In the quiet moments of his day, when he would otherwise be lost in thoughts about work or routine, his mind wandered back to the conversations they had shared. She had opened up to him in ways that no one ever had before. Her laughter felt like a gift. Her stories painted vivid pictures in his mind, and the way she cared about the little things, about people, about the world, made him realize how much he had been missing in his own life. He noticed the subtle things about her, how she always remembered his favorite type of coffee, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, or how her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams and aspirations. He liked the way she made everything feel more alive, more real. For someone who had always kept a bit of distance from others, she had a way of pulling him in, of making him feel seen and heard in a way that no one else had ever done. But it wasn't just about the small moments. There was something deeper growing between them, something unspoken, but undeniably real. It wasn't just the chemistry, though, that was there too. It was the way they connected on a human level, how they shared pieces of their lives that they had kept hidden from others. They had both been through struggles, through times when they felt lost, and now, somehow, they were finding their way back together, piece by piece. For her, it was no different. She had always been someone who held back, someone who had learned to keep her emotions tucked away for fear of getting hurt. But with him, it was different. With him, she felt like she could breathe a little easier. She didn't have to pretend. There was no need to guard her heart, to keep her walls up. She could be herself, completely, and he accepted her without question. She was still cautious, of course. There were days when she questioned whether this was real or just another fleeting moment. But whenever she looked at him, whenever he smiled at her with that warmth that seemed to radiate from him, she couldn't help but believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be something lasting. One evening, as the cafe began to quiet down, they found themselves sitting together at a corner table. It was a simple, peaceful moment. No grand gestures, no heavy words, just the two of them, enjoying each other's company. The world outside seemed to fade away, and in that space, everything felt right. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't talked that day?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. He looked at her, surprised by the question, but grateful for the honesty. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "I wonder if we would have just kept going like we were, not really noticing each other the way we do now." "I think we would have," she said with a small smile. "But maybe it would have taken a little longer for us to realize what was right in front of us." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Sometimes, people walk past each other every day without seeing what could be right in front of them. It wasn't until something shifted, until something clicked, that they realized what they had been missing all along. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their thoughts. The cafe was nearly empty now, and the soft hum of the lights above was the only sound filling the space. It felt peaceful, like the world outside didn't matter. All that mattered was the moment they were sharing, the quiet connection that had grown between them. "I'm glad we talked that day," he said after a few moments. "I'm glad we took the chance." "Me too," she replied softly, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "I think it was the right time." It felt like everything lined up perfectly. It was true. There were so many moments in life when it felt like the timing was wrong, when it seemed like everything was out of place. But sometimes, all it takes is one conversation, one moment of vulnerability, to change everything. And that's exactly what had happened between them. They had opened up to each other, stepped into a space of honesty and trust, and from there, everything had started to fall into place. There were still uncertainties, of course. They both knew that. There were still risks to take, and they both knew that not everything would be easy. But in that moment, sitting together in the quiet cafe, they also knew that they had something worth fighting for. Whatever came next, they were ready to face it together. As the evening wore on, they talked about everything and nothing at all. They shared stories from their past, things they hadn't told anyone else. And through it all, the connection between them only deepened. It was clear now that they were no longer just two people who had met by chance. They were two people who had found something real, something worth cherishing. When it was time to leave, they walked out into the cool night air, side by side. There was no need for words. The quiet understanding between them was enough. They didn't know what the future held, but they were no longer afraid of it. They had found each other, and that was enough, for now. As they parted ways that night, he couldn't help but smile. It wasn't a big, dramatic moment, but it was everything. It was the start of something new, something genuine, something that had the potential to grow into something beautiful. And as he walked away, he knew that whatever happened, he was glad they had taken the chance to see where this connection could go. The next chapter of their lives was just beginning, and neither of them could predict where it would lead. But for the first time in a long time, they were excited to find out together